Welcome to the MacMillan Report. I'm Marilyn Wilkes, your host, and our guest is Anne Marie Slaughter, President and CEO of New America. From 2009 to 2011, Professor Slaughter served as the Director of Policy Planning for the United States Department of State, the first woman to hold that position. Prior to her government service, Professor Slaughter was the Dean of Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. She has written or edited several books, including A New World Order, The Idea That Is America, Keeping Faith with Our Values in a Dangerous World, and Unfinished Business, Women, Men, Work, Family. She's also a frequent contributor to a number of publications, including the Atlantic and Project Syndicate. Professor Slaughter is with us today because she's giving the Harry L. Stimson Lectures on World Affairs at the MacMillan Center, which center on her forthcoming book, The Chessboard and the Web. Welcome, Professor Slaughter.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Let's begin with an overview of your book. Tell us about it.
Well, the chessboard and the web are two different ways of seeing the world. And for people who are interested in foreign policy or international relations, we generally think of geopolitics. We think of great powers interacting with each other, competing, fighting, sometimes cooperating. That's the chessboard world. That is the world where you think in the Cold War, for instance, if the United States did one thing, the Soviet Union would respond, and then the United States would respond again. It's chessboard strategy. That world's still with us. We have Iran, we have Russia resurgent, we have many countries where you still have to think strategically state to state. But we also live in a deeply connected world, a world less of states than of businesses and citizens and non-governmental groups, universities, criminals, a web that looks like the internet. If you see it, think of a map of the internet and you have all these nodes and they're connected to everybody else. That world is a world just as relevant to foreign policy as the traditional chessboard. So the book is really about here's what the world looks like from the chessboard perspective. Here's what it looks like from the web perspective. We need both. But, and this is the heart of the book, we need a set of tools to fight ISIS or to combat climate change or to think about how to stimulate entrepreneurship in countries that have no really lively economy or literacy or health. We need tools, and those tools are networks. And so the book is really about here's how to create networks that will help us achieve goals in the web world, and that foreign policymakers of the future have to operate both on the chessboard and in the web.
Okay, so what gave you the idea to do the book?
I have wanted to do this book for a long time, certainly since I came out of government. And part of it is really born of my experience in government, working for Secretary Clinton. And one of the things Secretary Clinton said was, diplomacy and development are equal pillars of our foreign policy. So yes, it's important to try to negotiate a deal with Iran, no question. But it's equally important to ensure that women's rights are protected around the world, that we have strong health systems so we don't have an Ebola-like crisis, to fight terrorism and trafficking in humans, trafficking in drugs, trafficking in arms. But what was so striking was, again, on that development side, we have foreign assistance programs. We give money to governments, and some of them are corrupt, and even if they spend the money on their people, you don't know quite what they're doing. We had no tools for how to think about those global problems. I couldn't go into Secretary Clinton and say, we should create X, and that will help solve the problem. When it's state to state, I can go in and say, we should sanction this state, or we should reach an agreement with this state. I didn't have anything comparable to that on the development side. So this, I have long wanted to write this book. And the other thing I'll say is, we live in a world of networks. I live on social media often, and I just felt like none of that was part of what we study in international relations.
I see, okay. And how are you doing the research for the book?
backwards.
Well,
I mean, in the sense that so one of the things interesting about this book is I have collected books in physics, books in economics, in sociology, in industrial organization, in psychology, in technology, and then more recently, lots of works on things like the mesh economy and where Silicon Valley is going, because that part of the U.S. economy is all about networks too. So I've collected all these books, and what I've done now is to go through enough so that I'm giving a set of lectures. I'll now go back with sort of, it's like building the scaffolding of a house. It takes a while to design it. You have to do a lot of prep to design it. You then, once it's up, then you fill it in.
Right,
That's where I am.
So let's get to the meat of the book. Give us some examples of, some of these 21st century problems that are affecting foreign policy.
Well, so let me give you a couple. The first one, let's think about Ukraine. So Ukraine, Russia invaded Ukraine 18 months ago, essentially took over the Crimea, and then has been destabilizing eastern Ukraine. And this has caused great diplomatic conflict between Russia and the EU and the US. Russia on one hand, the EU and the US on the other. Now, we have lots of chessboard ways of addressing that issue. We've sanctioned Russia, we've moved troops into the Baltic states, we've supplied military aid to the Ukrainian government, we've tried to diplomatically isolate Russia, all good. And that's the chessboard. But what's really going on here is the Ukrainian people are desperate for a better life. This is the second revolution they've had. They had one in 2007. They're on the border with Poland. They can see countries and governments that are functioning much better than theirs. Their government's totally corrupt. Their economy's stagnant. How are we going to actually help them achieve the economy and the government that they want? And that's where the networks come in. So I talk about, well, first of all, let's build defense networks to make them more resilient to continued Russian kind of harassment. I mean, it's not, because Russia's not marching troops over the border, Russia's infiltrating people. And so I talk about how you can build defensive networks that make it harder for Russia actually to destabilize. And then let's think about stabilization and assistance networks to help not just the Ukrainian government, but there are a whole class of young, digitally savvy Ukrainians who want startups, who want to build their economy. How do we build the networks that tie them to the right people in Europe and the United States and support them? So that's one sort of set of examples. Another would be, let's say we have a great solution. Let's say we know that in one country, this program for teaching kids to read has worked brilliantly. We know that, but it's helped maybe 1,000 kids. There are millions of children around the world who need to do that. So we need to figure out how you create a network that will replicate that program in the same way. If you think of AA, that's a classic example. There's alcoholic AA groups, right, all over the world. And they replicate because somebody wants to create one, and there's a template to do it. Or TEDx, right? These are people who love TED Talks, and they can create their own TEDx conferences. So I talk about the structure of those networks. If you create a template and you create the right set of incentives, you can get a replication network. So all different kinds of networks. Seems a little odd now because we haven't done them, but they should be as familiar tools as imposing sanctions.
So does the chessboard and the web ever come together at any point, or do they always remain separate in terms of solving problems?
That's a really good question. And they certainly will come together. For one thing, they'll conflict. If you're trying to build a network with a country's entrepreneurs and you need to sanction them or you need to do something that, isolate them diplomatically, the people you're trying to network with will respond to the way you're treating their government. So there's always going to be trade-offs in various ways. I would say, though, for most people, this is more like parallel play. For one thing, the network strategies are always longer term, and it's actually very important to put them in place ahead of time. So a good example would be, let's say you've got a very fragile state, there's been a lot of ethnic tension, you want a network for monitoring violence early on. Well, you can't put that in place once there's a crisis in that country. That's too late. So the chessboard strategies tend to be the short term, a crisis is hit, what do we do? The web strategies tend to be the longer term, think about how you do this in such a way that they have value and that when the crisis hits, they can be activated. So that's why I say I think you need to, I call it seeing in stereo.
Okay. So what about some of the other problems of the world? For instance, if we look at the Syrian refugees, for instance, what do you offer in terms of that, in terms of solutions, web or the chessboard?
Right.
I'm probably a little both, maybe, or
a little both. So for one thing, so Europe is trying to decide what Europe's policy is toward refugees. That's for European governments to work out, or the United Nations and the United Nations agencies trying to help refugees. That's the chessboard. I mean, it's states coming together, but it's really the chessboard world. On the other hand, there are many more creative solutions that we have never thought of. So one is, we think of refugee camps as places of misery and squalor and places people are in and want to get out of as fast as possible. If you thought about refugee camps in networks terms, you would realize you have hundreds of thousands of people in one place, a place where you could provide health and education and economic training. You could make it the node, the central node of networks that spread back to the home country, and with the idea that what you're actually doing is preparing people to go back and to go back better. And we just never think about a refugee camp that way. We don't think about it as, oh my goodness, we've got all these women and children. We could actually, I mean, of course we have education, but we don't think of it as an opportunity to build a better society for when they go home.
Right.
Another idea, which is out of the box, the Greek government has between 500 and 1,500 islands. And many people buy those islands privately. You can actually buy islands online, believe it or not. I mean, some of us can, I can't. But there's an Egyptian billionaire who is buying islands to build basically not camps for refugees, but cities, to build up an infrastructure where refugees can live, can develop an economy. Now, again, if you think of refugees, if there's 60 million refugees in the world, that's the equivalent of Hungary and Belgium and Israel and Norway all put together. So we ought to be thinking of these people as kind of a nation in transition, and thinking about, well, how do you create hubs where they can be in such a way that A, they have a good life, but B, that's a healthy node for more positive networks longer term.
So what do you hope people take away from your book? I know you're still working on it.
Yes, I was going to say, every time you say my book, I think, ooh, wouldn't it be nice if it were written?
We're looking at spring, though, for it, yes?
Well, we're looking at spring for having it done. It'll be another year before it's actually out.
Okay.
But yeah.
So, once it is done, what would you like people to take away? What's the idea?
What I tell people is I hope that after reading this book, and it will be written in a very accessible way, and it won't be that long, but I hope you'll read the newspaper differently every morning. I hope,
in what way?
Well, I hope you'll look at the front page and you'll see U.S. and Iran at loggerheads, or U.S. and Russia, or China and Japan, whatever it is, and you'll think, oh yes, that's the chessboard view of this problem. Now, let me read the article and think about what's the web view, who's connected to whom, both to understand what's going on, but also to anticipate what we could do about it, what tools need to be activated, what your role is in it, because the web view, we're players. If you're working for a multinational company, if you're teaching or studying at a global university, if you're part of a civic group or a church group that's connected to others, that's your part of the world. And so I hope you will see the world differently, you'll read articles differently, you'll ask more intelligent questions, you'll have a better understanding of how to conduct foreign policy in a world that is both the chessboard and the web.
Very good. Thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing some of your work.
I enjoyed it.
For more information about Professor Slaughter and her research, please visit our website at macmillanreport.yale.edu. Be sure to join us again for another episode of the MacMillan Report, made possible through funding from the Whitney and Betty MacMillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale.